Welcome to Craving the Heat, where desire takes the lead and every story leaves you wanting more. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments and keep up with our latest naughty stories. The first day I walked into her office, I wasn't sure what to expect. I had taken the job out of necessity, not passion. I needed the money, and being an assistant wasn't exactly the dream I'd had for myself. But when I met Clara Bennett, everything shifted. She was the kind of woman who made you notice her even when you weren't trying. Late 30s, married to a wealthy corporate executive, polished in every way yet beneath the sharp suits and the practiced smile, there was something soft in her eyes, something that hinted at loneliness. She greeted me warmly, almost too warmly for someone in her position, and within minutes I realized that this job wasn't going to be as simple as answering calls and arranging schedules. Clara had a presence that pulled me in. She had an air of command but also vulnerability, like someone who'd spent too long being admired for the wrong things. She laughed at my dry jokes, leaned a little closer when she spoke, and thanked me for the smallest tasks as if I had saved her from some unbearable weight. At first, I brushed it off as kindness. Maybe she just treated her staff with more respect than most people in her world did. But as the weeks went on, I couldn't ignore the way her gaze lingered, or how she'd invite me to stay late under the guise of helping with a project. When all we did was sit in her office sipping wine, she pulled from a drawer, talking about her life. She told me about her husband, Richard, a man she described with a careful neutrality that spoke louder than her words. "He's busy," she would say, her fingers circling the rim of her glass. "Always busy. The company takes everything from him and leaves me with what's left." I never pressed, but I didn't have to. The silence that followed said enough. One evening, after a particularly long day, Clara suggested we take a walk instead of heading home right away. The city was quiet, washed in amber from the streetlights, and she walked close enough that our arms brushed. At one point she stopped, looked at me, and whispered, "Do you ever feel like no one really sees you?" Her voice broke a little on that last word, and I realized then that for all her wealth and beauty, she was starving for something simple: connection. The first time it happened, neither of us planned it. We had stayed late again, her office glowing dim with just a lamp on her desk. She leaned over to show me a detail in a proposal, her hair falling against my cheek, her perfume wrapping around me like smoke. When I looked up, she was already watching me, her lips parted, her eyes daring me. "Clara," I started, unsure if I should, but she closed the distance before I could think twice. What followed was messy and dangerous and intoxicating. It was the kind of passion that made you forget reason, forget consequences. She clung to me like she'd been holding her breath for years, and in that moment, I realized just how deeply she'd been unloved in our marriage. Days turned into weeks, and what began as stolen moments in her office grew into something much heavier. We'd find excuses to be alone: business trips, late meetings, even mornings when her husband had already left. Each time, the intensity only deepened. She'd tell me things she never told anyone, how she hated the way her life looked perfect on the outside but hollow on the inside, how she feared she was invisible even in her own home, how she wondered if love was supposed to feel different. And I told her the truth, that I saw her, that I wanted her not because of her beauty, her status, or her wealth, but because of the way she bit her lip when she was nervous, the way her laughter cracked open her polished shell, the way she whispered my name as if it was the only word that mattered. But with every moment of passion came the shadow of reality. Richard was still there, her husband, the man who had built her life, even if he no longer filled it. There were nights she'd pull away from me, guilt flickering in her eyes, and whisper, "This can't last." Yet the very next day, she'd find her way back into my arms, trembling with need. The line between love and betrayal blurred. I wasn't sure anymore if I was helping her escape or if I was becoming her prison. All I knew was that when we were together, nothing else existed. No rings, no vows, no rules. Just her lips, her touch, her voice whispering in the dark. And maybe that was enough to keep us both coming back. Even though we knew it couldn't last forever, the affair didn't stay hidden as easily as we had imagined. In the beginning, it was quick glances and subtle touches. By the second month, we had mastered the art of silent communication. A brush of her hand against mine in the elevator meant tonight. A flicker in her eyes across the conference table meant wait for me after. It was reckless, but it was intoxicating. The more time I spent with Clara, the more I began to notice the fractures in our world. She wasn't simply neglected. She was forgotten. Her husband, Richard, was a man consumed entirely by business dinners, board meetings, and acquisitions. He would call her darling when introducing her to colleagues, but never once look at her the way she deserved. I'd been in their home a handful of times, dropping her off after late nights under the excuse of helping her with work, and the silence between them was deafening. One night, Clara invited me inside after Richard had called to say he wouldn't be home until late. The house was pristine, curated like a showroom, yet cold. She poured wine into 2 glasses, her hands shaking as she passed me mine. "I thought this would feel wrong," she whispered, staring into the ruby swirl in her glass. "But the truth is, it feels more like coming alive than anything else. Has in years, her vulnerability shook me." I reached across the table, covering her hand with mine, and for a long time we just sat there, not speaking, but feeling everything. Our relationship moved from hidden kisses in shadowed hallways to entire weekends spent together when Richard traveled. We would steal away to a cabin an hour outside the city, a place Clara had bought years ago, but rarely visited. There, away from everything, she shed the armor of her perfect life. She would curl against me on the sofa, barefaced, hair unkempt, wrapped in one of my shirts. She would laugh until her cheeks were pink, tell me about books she once loved, dreams she had given up, and whisper how she hadn't realized love could feel so consuming, so freeing, so dangerous all at once. But with each stolen moment, the stakes grew higher. There were close calls like the afternoon her husband came home unexpectedly while I was still in her office. Clara shoved me into a supply closet, her face pale with panic as Richard walked in, asking why she was still working so late. From behind the door, I heard her laugh, cool and composed, as if nothing had ever threatened to unravel her perfect facade. That night, when she finally let me out, she collapsed into my arms, trembling. "This is going to destroy us," she whispered, "and I don't know if I care anymore." Her words cut deep because they carried a truth neither of us could ignore. The affair had stopped being an escape. It had become the center of our lives, the one thing we couldn't live without. The turning point came on her birthday. Richard had forgotten, flying overseas for some deal. I showed up at her door with flowers and a small cake, unsure if it was too simple for a woman like her. When she opened the door, her eyes filled with tears. "You remembered," she said, her voice cracking. I set the cake down, and before I could say anything, she wrapped her arms around me, holding me as though she never wanted to let go. That night, we didn't just fall into bed. We lingered, slow and deliberate, memorizing every detail of each other. It wasn't just passion. It was devotion. Afterward, lying tangled in the sheets, she whispered, "If this is wrong, then I don't want to be right." Not anymore. From that night on, something shifted. Clara stopped talking about ending things. Instead, she began to imagine a life where she wasn't Richard's forgotten wife, but a woman free to love openly, recklessly, without shame. But the risk loomed over us like a storm. Every kiss, every night together felt like stepping closer to the edge of a cliff. Still, neither of us could stop. We were too far gone, bound not by secrecy alone, but by a love that felt inevitable, even if the world called it betrayal. The weeks after her birthday only made everything more complicated. Clara and I lived in 2 different worlds, but every day those worlds collided in ways neither of us had planned. At the office, I was her assistant, again professional, composed, careful with every word and every glance. But once the doors closed, once it was just us, the air would shift. I became the only person who truly saw her. Richard grew more absent than ever. He would fly to Europe, to Asia, sometimes gone for weeks, sending flowers delivered by his secretary as if that made up for his absence. Clara had learned to smile politely at those gestures, but I could see the bitterness growing in her eyes. Each bouquet was another reminder that he knew the rules of appearances, but not the reality of love. One Friday evening, she asked me to stay late under the guise of finishing reports. By the time the office emptied out, she was pacing near the window, staring at the city lights as if searching for courage. "I'm tired of sneaking," she said finally, her voice trembling but firm. "I'm tired of living a life that looks perfect but feels hollow. Do you understand what I'm saying?" I did, more than she knew. I crossed the room, wrapped my arms around her from behind, and whispered, "Then don't. Not with me." She turned in my arms, eyes glistening, and kissed me like it was a promise she'd been waiting years to make. That night, instead of going to her house, we booked a hotel suite downtown. It was reckless, anyone could have seen us, but Clara didn't care anymore. She walked through the lobby in her fitted black dress, her hand brushing mine, her chin lifted with a defiance I had never seen in her before. Inside the suite, the facade of control fell away. She dropped her purse on the floor, pulled me close, and whispered, "Tonight, I want to forget everything but you." The hours that followed weren't rushed or frantic. They were slow, deliberate, like she was memorizing me piece by piece, as though she was reclaiming a part of herself she had lost long ago. Afterward, she lay with her head on my chest, tracing lazy circles on my skin, her voice soft. "When I was younger," she confessed, "I thought love would look like stability. Like a big house, security, someone who provided. And maybe that's what Richard gives me. But you give me something else. Something I didn't know I needed." I kissed her hair, heart pounding. "And what's that?" "Freedom," she whispered. "The freedom to be myself, to feel." From then on, the affair wasn't just stolen moments. It became our own private world. We had routines. Coffee together in the mornings when Richard was away, dinners at the cabin on weekends, walks through the park where we pretended to be. Just another couple in love, even though we knew eyes might be watching. But the closer we grew, the more dangerous it became. Richard began to notice Clara's absence of interest in him. He commented once at a dinner party, his tone sharp though, disguised with laughter, "Clara seems more radiant these days." "Who's your secret?" The table laughed, but Clara froze, her hand tightening around her glass. Later, when we were alone, she admitted his words had chilled her. "He's not a fool," she murmured, resting her forehead against mine. "But," for once, "I don't care if he finds out." And yet, we both knew discovery would mean destruction, not just of her marriage, but of everything she had built in her public life. The thought haunted me at night. Was I pulling her into ruin? Or was I the one giving her the life she was brave enough to finally want? The breaking point came one stormy night at the cabin. Rain lashed against the windows, the fire crackled, and Clara stood by the flames in nothing but one of my shirts. She looked at me with an intensity that made my chest tighten. "If I leave him," she said, "there's no going back. I'll lose friends, status, everything I've worked to keep. But I'll still have you. And maybe that's enough." I crossed the room, cupping her face in my hands, forcing her to meet my gaze. "Clara, I don't want to be your escape. I want to be your choice." Her lips parted, trembling. Then she kissed me, deep and desperate, as if sealing a vow. "You are my choice," she whispered against my mouth. "You always were." That night, our passion burned fiercer than ever, but it wasn't just desire, it was surrender. We weren't hiding from her marriage anymore. We were stepping into something new, dangerous, but undeniable. And in the quiet hours before dawn, as she slept in my arms, I realized we were no longer living an affair. We were living a love story, one that could either save us or destroy us completely. The days following that stormy night at the cabin felt like living in two separate realities. At work, Clara and I kept our masks on. She was the sharp, composed CEO's wife who occasionally dropped by to check on operations. I was her efficient assistant, polite and unobtrusive, always keeping just the right professional distance. To the rest of the office, I was invisible. To her, I was everything Dot, but behind the scenes, everything had changed. We had gone from whispered conversations and fleeting touches to stolen weekends, nights that bled into mornings, confessions murmured in the dark. We no longer danced around what this was. Clara had stopped pretending that her marriage was salvageable. She still wore Richard's name, but her heart, her laughter, her longing, all of it belonged to me, Dot, and yet the world didn't stop for us. The danger lingered like smoke we couldn't wave away. Richard began to suspect more than he let on. His travel schedule had him away most of the time, but when he was home, he studied Clara with a sharpness that unsettled me. He'd ask casual questions. "You've been busy lately. Where do you go during the day?" Or "Who keeps you smiling when I'm not here?" They sounded like jokes, but Clara always answered too quickly, too smoothly, as though rehearsed. One evening, he returned earlier than expected. I had just dropped Clara off at the house after spending the afternoon together. Hours later, she texted me from her bedroom. "He knows something." He asked why I smelled of your cologne, Dot. My chest tightened. For the first time, I felt the walls of our world closing in. Still, we couldn't stop. If anything, the risk only fueled us more. Every moment together felt stolen from fate itself. The thrill of her hand brushing mine under a table. The secret notes she left in my briefcase. The way she'd whisper, "I miss you," in a room full of people. All of it made the affair feel both fragile and unbreakable. One Saturday, Clara suggested something bold. We flew to Italy for 3 days under the guise of a business trip. For her, it was the first time in years she felt like a woman rather than a wife defined by someone else's name. We walked the narrow cobblestone streets of Florence, holding hands in public, laughing freely. At night, in a little apartment we rented above a wine bar, she kissed me with abandon. No longer the careful Clara who worried about what might happen if someone saw. "I could stay here forever," she murmured one night, her hair spread across the pillow, her eyes soft. "No one knows us. No one owns us. Just you and me." And for the first time, I believed it was possible. That maybe we could escape the life we were running from, but reality came crashing back when we returned. Richard confronted her. He didn't scream or accuse. He sat across from her at the dining table and said in a quiet, cutting voice, "Tell me the truth, Clara. Who is he?" She told me later that her hand shook so badly she couldn't lift her glass of water. She denied it, of course, said she was just tired, that his long absences had left her lonely, but she wasn't unfaithful. Richard didn't push it. Instead, he gave her a look that chilled her more than anger ever could. "I built this life for you," he said. "Don't ruin it." That night, Clara came to my apartment, her face pale, her body trembling. She collapsed into my arms and whispered, "I can't do this anymore. Living two lives, pretending." I held her close, brushing my lips against her temple. "Then don't. Leave him. Be with me." She pulled back, searching my eyes, tears glistening. "Do you even understand what that means? The press will devour me. My friends will turn on me. He'll make sure I lose everything." I cupped her, face in my hands, studying her. "You won't lose me. Isn't that enough?" Her silence stretched heavy, but then she kissed me, slow, lingering, filled with every ounce of the love and fear in her. The weeks after that conversation were filled with push and pull. Some days, she was ready to walk away, throw everything into the fire for us. Other days, she was distant, afraid, reminding herself of all she stood to lose. I tried to be patient, but my heart ached every time she returned to the house she shared with Richard. The turning point came one night when Richard threw a lavish gala at their estate. The guest list included politicians, investors, and every elite name in the city. Clara had to play the role of the perfect hostess. I attended as staff, shadowing her movements, invisible as always. But that night, Clara slipped me a note. Just 5 words, scribbled quickly. Meet me in the garden. When I found her there, hidden by the tall hedges and the glow of fairy lights, she looked at me with an intensity I hadn't seen before. I can't stand it anymore, she said, her voice fierce. I stand beside him. Smile for pictures, and all I can think about is you. I don't want this life. I want you. Only you. I pulled her into my arms, heart hammering. Then choose me right now. Her answer was a kiss passionate, reckless, desperate. The kind of kiss that burned every bridge behind us. That night, after the gala ended, she didn't return to Richard's bed. She came to mine instead. And when the morning came with sunlight spilling through my blinds, she lay beside me and whispered, I've made my choice. I'm done hiding. It wasn't the end of the war, not by far. Richard would fight, society would whisper, and the path ahead would be brutal. But in that moment, with her body pressed against mine and her eyes filled with a fierce, fearless love, I knew Clara had finally stopped being afraid, and whatever battles came next, we would face them together. Clara didn't go back that night. She stayed in my apartment, and though she tried to sleep, I could feel her body tense beside me, every breath uneven. I lay awake, watching the city lights flicker through the blinds. Knowing her decision had shifted everything. Around 3 a.m, she turned in my arms, her hand resting on my chest, her eyes wide in the dim light. Do you ever wonder, she whispered, if this is worth the cost? I kissed her forehead, then her lips, slow and steady. Every second with you makes it worth it. She smiled faintly, but her eyes held tears. And then, almost desperately, she kissed me again. Harder this time. It wasn't gentle, it was hungry, raw. The kind of kiss that spoke of years of neglect and a love she thought she'd never find. Her body pressed against mine, every movement filled with urgency, as though she needed to drown out the fear with closeness. When her lips trailed down my neck, when her hands tightened around me, I understood. This was her choice, spoken not in words, but in touch. The hours that followed were fire and tenderness woven together. She gave herself to me completely, and I to her. We whispered each other's names like prayers, as though saying them aloud could protect us from the storm waiting outside. When dawn finally came, she lay draped across me, her breathing soft. Her lips swollen from our kisses. I feel alive again, she murmured, tracing patterns on my skin. Do you know how long it's been since I felt seen? I held her close, pressing my lips to her hair. You'll never be unseen again, not with me. For weeks we lived in that fever dream. Whenever Richard traveled, Clara stayed with me. We cooked dinners together, laughed over spilled wine, danced in the kitchen barefoot. Sometimes she'd show up at my office just to drag me out for an afternoon drive, her hand tangled with mine the entire time. But our passion was more than stolen moments. It was slow mornings, waking up with her hair a tangled halo on the pillow. It was long nights where we spoke of everything: her childhood, my fears, dreams we'd buried too long. And always it ended the same way, in each other's arms, our love burning away the silence of the world outside. Yet reality clawed at us. Richard wasn't blind. His questions grew sharper, his temper shorter. Once, Clara arrived at my apartment with her wrist red from where he'd grabbed her during an argument. The sight made something primal stir inside me. You don't have to take this, I told her, voice shaking with anger. Leave him, tonight. She looked at me, torn. It isn't that simple. If I walk away, he'll ruin me. He'll take everything. Then let him, I said, cupping her face, my voice softening. He can't take me, and isn't that all that matters now? Her lips trembled, but she kissed me fiercely, answering without words. The breaking point came on a stormy evening. Richard was supposed to be in Paris for business. Instead, he returned early and found Clara gone. She was at my place, curled up in one of my shirts, her hair damp from the rain. When her phone buzzed with his calls, she ignored it. When he knocked on her door later that night, she stayed in my arms, trembling but resolute. "I can't keep pretending," she whispered into my chest. "I won't." And with those words, something inside her shifted forever. The next morning, she packed a single suitcase. She left behind the mansion, the jewelry, the carefully constructed life Richard had built for her. She came to me instead. No grand speeches, no dramatic escape, just a quiet, steady decision. That night, for the first time, we didn't feel like an affair. We felt like a beginning. We made love with no guilt, no rush, no fear of someone walking through the door. Every kiss was slower, deeper, as though we had all the time in the world. Her laughter echoed in my apartment as she pulled me back to bed again and again, whispering, "I'm yours. Finally, I'm yours." And as the rain tapped against the windows, her body curled against mine. I knew this wasn't just passion. This was the kind of love people searched for their whole lives, the kind that could burn down everything you thought mattered, only to reveal what truly did. We didn't know what the future would bring: Richard's wrath, society's judgment, the weight of starting over. But that night, with Clara's heart beating against mine and her hand clasped firmly in mine, I didn't care. Because for the first time, we weren't hiding. We were free,